Yeah. So would love to hear from anyone around what are you thinking? We're mid-year, I will just say real quick, I attended the RSA security conference. Alex, I know you did too, so did Alexa. The big themes this year, were the buzzwords, if you will, where it was AI, of course, but it was AI doing, how is it a threat? AI, how can you leverage it for good? And then how do you secure AI? A third category, how do you make sure your AI is not infiltrated and used for evil by someone else, right? Or surreptitiously used. So there's a big AI undercurrent and through this. That's not where we need to center the conversation, but I'm using that as an example. So I'm opening up the floor.
Yeah, I don't know if I could start with the three topics that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the first one is AI and the math behind it. I did a little bit of an intro last time, and I think I lost a lot of people by, by the fact that math is apparently scary for people. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to assess the situation and wanted to see how deep we want to go. If I go back into, here's the tech we need for AI, here's how it's really done, and here's the math that is the underlying stuff, right? So I think I lost pretty much everybody already at the Markov chains, right? And so that's not a terribly good thing to lose people, because that's really where it all starts, not where it ends, right? So the Markov chains are basically compound probabilities for something to happen, and then you can extract some data out of it. Effectively, you then transform it using a transformer, and I can explain what a transformer is. And then you conduct some advanced matrix math or tensor math, depending on how many dimensions you have in your data. And then you have a model that you can use for inference. So, my question is, this was like the less than a minute overview of how it works, but it would be good to see in the chat window how deep you want me to go, because we do that all the time. I do that on a daily basis. We build processors for it, right? So I speak that fairly fluently, but of course it doesn't do anybody any good if nobody understands what the hell I'm talking about. So if you could get me some feedback on how deep you want me to go, I'd be happy to contemplate that and then make the presentation a little bit more easy to digest next time. So that was part one. Part two is, I think I got a bunch of questions on a snide comment from myself last time that was indicating that I was pretty ticked off at the fact that the Biden administration, in the aftermath of the SolarWinds breach, instituted a commission to find out what the hell was behind it, and the commission never met, and they never, of course, created a report. And so that's sort of annoying, because if you remember, in 2021, in my last few weeks at my prior startup, I gave a presentation with regards to the things that we found with the SolarWinds hack. And so just a quick recap, I had enough time because my company didn't need me anymore. In fact, they wanted me out, and I had 3 interns. So we focused simply on SolarWinds and the part that was, oh, okay, so good. Alexa, thanks a lot. Yeah, we will get there. So we focused on just the Orion software, because that was the one that was breached. And we had an initial look at the number of files that were open source. And so, Orion consists of a piece of closed source, but about 75% of that is in fact open source. So we found that about 200,000 files were needed to build the open source part of Orion. And of course, we couldn't figure out how to skim through 200,000 files with 3 interns and myself. So we narrowed it down to about 1,000 files that looked sort of suspicious and would have had the ability to go through the administrative parts of Orion that in fact was dealing with the servers that got breached. We then whittled that down to 20 files that looked even more suspicious and found one file that was maintained by an unknown maintainer in a non-version controlled repository that had a backdoor in it. And so we assumed that would be more of those files because you always, if you want to penetrate something, you put more backdoors in just for shits and grins in case one gets found. So since we only found one, but of course we had limited resources, I presented that to this forum, but I also sent that out to the newly formed Biden Commission. And about a year later, I got an email back saying, yeah, we don't really care. Right.
Oh.
So, and that was right before the CISA was bestowed with the FBI blessings as to who would be in charge of following this kind of stuff. Anyway,
just out of curiosity, what branch was that? The group you sent that to, and the government? Which branch was that?
That was the commission that was installed by President Biden.
So it was just it was a standalone commission. Okay.
That's right. It was a standalone commission. Right.
Also, I think worth mentioning, correct me if I'm wrong, Excel, is you had some interactions with the Linux Foundation on this that weren't also too constructive. So
yeah, don't get me started on that.
Well, just to the point that there seems to be a pervasive attitude of this kind of thing happening at the levels where you think the help should be coming from.
Yeah. And
often it is, but in many cases we can see that there's some fundamentally broken things in the system.
Yes. So with the Linux Foundation, it's very simple. You basically either it's something important, in which case Linus Torvalds takes care of it personally, and it will be he's the maintainer of the kernel, all kinds of stuff, or it's something that nobody cares about, in which case he doesn't care about it either. And so that's causing friction. Let me put it that way. It's not terribly helpful, right? So, yeah. So as I said, we found one file that definitely was compromised and had a backdoor. We sent all that information over to the commission, and we never heard back for about a year. And about a year later, they said, yeah, well, we don't care. So, that tells you what level of attention gets associated to these things that have a very, very big impact on our cybersecurity. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is that, we talk about how to prevent breaches, and we try to make sure that every individual and every small, medium-sized company can benefit from what we discover and discuss here. But the simple matter of the fact is, most of the breaches, like a bank robbery, occur there where there's the most data, right? I mean, I don't know if you read it, but AT&T was breached again. So, I mean, I was a T-Mobile customer for 25 years. I was breached, or they were breached 3 times. I switched to AT&T because I got sick of getting my credit monitored. Guess what? AT&T got breached. Every single customer's data is out there now, 200 million records, including phone calls and the call logs, right? So the problem I'm seeing is that, yes, we must all improve our posture and our attack surface. There's no doubt about that. But the breaches that have affected me so far were all breaches not of my company or me as a person. They were all breaches that targeted companies that held my data and promised to hold it securely. And of course they didn't, right? So these are all things that we need to take into account when we discuss what the cybersecurity posture should look like, because it is not only the individual, it is not only the small and medium business, it is also a whole lot of idiots in big companies that don't know what the hell they're doing, and they should be knowing what they're doing, right? And yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Great. I'm not great, but those are all problems, right? We need to look at. Um, yeah, and it's I won't comment too much. I was taking some notes while you were talking, Axel, and I want to get to the next person, but there's definitely some things we need to dig into there. It was just the last part of what you said. Sorry, I'll just say the thing that was on my mind, and I was kind of looking at Marguerite to some degree. Is just we've talked about this before, but as the breaches continue to happen, doesn't seem to be like there's a huge incentive for companies to stem the tide, and that's maybe a cynical view, and maybe that's a conversation we can have later. But it's the momentum is such going the wrong direction that you just wonder what does it take.
I agree. I mean, there aren't any consequences, not
Yeah,
lasting anyway. And
yeah,
as humans, it's hard if we're not penalized or rewarded, right?
yeah,
Um, our behavior won't
yeah.
necessarily change. And I've been involved in organizations, I tend to not engage with them because their calculus is, yes, this is a cost of doing business. We'll take that risk.
Mhm.
And I'm like, wow, we're not a good fit
So they
because
just price it into the business model, right, as a
Mhm,
cost. Yeah,
mhm.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
um,
The ostrich paradox, or
yeah,
as it
yeah.
was. But
Thank you, Nalini.
Mhm.
yeah,
Irina, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think that we have reached the point where we cannot just rely on individual companies or individuals to protect themselves. We are in a stage where big cities were almost, well, more than 100 years ago, because when the firefighters were run by insurance companies, we need protection on a more standardized and global level here. And I don't think we will be getting it anytime soon because how dysfunctional our government is and how difficult it is to make people actually work together. So I'm very pessimistic at the moment because I'm thinking that the fact that I'm losing control over my life, not just over my data, with what is happening because my data is sloshing everywhere. I believe that anybody can look up whatever they want, regardless of what I do or don't do. But the problem is my daily ordinary life, not to mention my professional activities, become more and more complicated because of an avalanche of different demands on me and of different complications in my tools related to all sorts of things, including AI. Basically, I think we are at a breaking point, frankly, as a society.
I think like a big issue is that even putting aside like the cybersecurity risks, a lot of these companies are incentivized to kind of take the data and do whatever they can with it because that's just how capitalism works, right? Their incentive is to maximize revenue, maximize the stock price. So it's in direct contradiction to what is good for the individual consumer, the individuals. And the way we is kind of like it's weird. Like you talk about privacy rights, but I really think that you're not going to put, privacy doesn't actually exist anymore, right? Nothing's private. So I think it needs to be changed in the way that people look at it and governments look at it into a property right. And that we as individuals have rights in the property that is data that these companies are monetizing, and that we have a share in a monetization and get to make decisions about how to monetize it ourselves. So I want to see a transition to data being seen as a property because that's how it's being treated by these companies, and they're selling it and reselling it. They're even giving it to data brokers, right? So why shouldn't the individual consumer get a share of that through some digital currency?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. And I've seen philosophers as well as attorneys posit that. In addition, one thing that often gets lost is context. So it's very different to have parameters about someone that's static information versus behavioral information versus other things that are even more sensitive like biometrics that don't change. And, we still have, we're not a precision instrument in the legal world in many instances, because it's in reaction to something that has happened that brings forth legislation, and it takes a long time. How do we actually apply this in a way that makes sense? But having us have a greater say at the table, and having things that are not bringing them into the light of day, because companies are also not incented to actually make things clear. And even the language, a consumer, right, to consume comes from Latin and it means to destroy. These are about people. And one of the ways that I reach people is, would this work for your grandmother? Would you do this to your children? It sometimes changes things. I don't know if you're seeing that. I'd love to hear, because being highly analytical, it's like, how do we take it from the abstract and from the pendulum reactivity cycles that we all experience to something that's actually sustainable? This is, along with like civics in this country, it's like, what we have to get away from sound bites into having more context and more nuance and comfort with the ambiguity and guidelines for making good decisions. And I think you're absolutely right. More of it, the incentives are just off in the US.
Yeah, and I'll give an example that, it was even going on years ago. So there were companies, and there probably still are these companies, because they were doing this like 5, 6, 7 years ago, where they were basically reaching out to people whose relatives had passed away very quickly thereafter, saying, hey, we got a digital representation of your passed away relative. Do you want us to sell that to you? Right? We can give you this or that, like very Black Mirror. But again, because it's a person who's passed away, there's no privacy or any kind of right for someone who's not there anymore, right? And another thing that it was getting into law enforcement too, that some law enforcement individuals would try to use, if there was a body, they would try to see if they could use the fingerprint to open phones and get into the phone and stuff like that. So there are all these weird gray areas where if you treat it as a property, it could be inherited, right? Like it can be inherited to the individuals, like successors, right, their children, whoever. But if it's a privacy right, now it's dead, right? Like if the person's not there, the privacy right is also gone.
That's right. I'd love to talk more with you, probably offline, about that topic, since I still serve as a spiritual director and a community and clinical chaplain. And those issues about legacy come up, and I'm like, a private company is going to own this, just like in genetic counseling and 23andMe, which is a myriad of problems, not just in the privacy space.
Could I, Chris, I think this might be a good time to maybe explain a little bit about our framework that we used when we talked about cybersecurity and SolarWinds, and then privacy, and kind of, because we had some content we developed and stuff, because it sounds like we're bringing up really key fundamental concepts about, privacy sort of, I guess, surpassing, a person after they pass, and these kinds of implications that I think are going to merit a further discussion so that we can capture the content.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I don't have, we have a handy dandy slide that we haven't paraded out in a bit. Alex, I don't know if you can lay hands on it or not, but essentially I'll speak to the idea. So what we've done in the past, and it seems like it's served us all pretty well, is a topic like this comes up where everyone's kind of digging in, right? It's pretty juicy. And we have some dialogue around what are the facets of the area that we want as a group want to go deeper on and come up with a position on. And we do that by some prioritization. Usually let's say there's, I don't know, 10 to 15 aspects, and we kind of do some prioritization on kind of the criticality to, IFPO is innovation for the benefit of humankind. So kind of the criticality to the citizen or greater good, and then our ability to actually influence. And it doesn't mean we don't look at anything else, but we kind of hone in on what's that sweet spot of it's really important. The group feels it's really important, and we feel like we may have some levers to have some influence. And so I was taking notes, and we have this recorded too, so we can glean things. But this feels like a topic where we can do that. We can kind of run that through together in an upcoming meeting, run this privacy piece, because a lot has actually changed since we went deep for, I don't know, maybe a half dozen meetings on privacy about 2 years ago, and we haven't really picked it up since then. So what I can do is spell out leader of what kind of where we kind of ground we tread, and doesn't mean we don't want to go back to it. There may be really new insights and things have changed, but then probably more importantly, we can talk about what's really key in today's conversation. What we want to do with that.
Yeah. So if Nicole, if you can make me co-host, I can show a couple of slides. But also, it's one of the things that's gone on. We're in year 3, I think, Chris, of meeting, right?
Yeah.
And so, we've had, this couple of important findings thanks to Excel on the SolarWinds front. We had, we essentially did some very valuable work that ended up getting wrapped into the Secure the Village pilot program, right, Stan? And some of the folks have joined as coaches as part of that program. Chris and Shmuel are working on a startup that I think got some inspiration, I think, potentially from the discussion that's gone on at this group. So there's been output that's gone on and it's been actionable.
Absolutely. And also, there's one more example, if I could. I don't want to derail your train of thought, but Irina, we actually spent about, I don't know, Irina, 6 or 8 months really diagramming and going deep on the plight of a small business owner, like a micro small business, from both a cybersecurity and a privacy perspective, not so much on the privacy. And that actually helped inform the pilot that Stan's talking about.
That's
there
right.
were pieces of that we pulled right in to saying, how do we secure a small business in this pilot? How do we help their tech teams, their MSPs that support them? So yeah, there's direct traceability to what we talk about here and how it actually has some impact. Sorry, Alex, didn't mean to jump into that. Wanted to give Irene some props too.
Yeah, that discussion around your situation, Irina, was really helped us, and we're still struggling with it. That intersection of what a family, an individual has to do, what a business has to do, and where the pieces fit together, because your situation is like so unique that it becomes a wonderful example as we're struggling through this stuff, and it infuses kind of the way we're thinking about this. So absolutely.
So yeah, if everybody can see what I'm sharing, that is the topic progression sort of rubric that we came up with. That's what we used as a backdrop for the cybersecurity and privacy discussions that went on over the course of 3, 4, 5 months. And of course, continue as topics because nothing has changed. It's only got worse, if I may say, unfortunately. Okay, and it's just a way for us to organize our discussion, right? And so, if in a little more detail, there's one of the privacy decks that we used as a backdrop for some of the privacy meetings. You can see we worked on the things like an initial definition, and then kind of as we move through the conversation rubric, what were some of the outputs? And there are slide decks and recordings and stuff. Obviously, there are things there's a little bit of content on the IFBO side, but I think a bigger part of that lives, I think, on Excel's site and maybe somewhere else. So we need to get a little better about posting the stuff out there. But my only point in bringing this up is that we could have, if we're going to embark on or continue the AI discussion, and we've had somebody from the head of ethics from SAP present. We had Jacqueline, who's one of our members, do a high level kind of overview of AI today versus the AI that has been with us for years and what is different, right? We had an attorney from the Silicon Valley Law Group who was chair of the ABA Robotics and AI section talk a little bit, but we don't know where to go because it's such a vast topic, right? And so having this as a backdrop could help us organize our thoughts moving forward. Yeah, so that's just something for us to think about where we might go with this.
Yeah, thanks for serving that up, Alex. And also, it is making me the privacy topic specifically. I'll do some cleanup of our slides, and so Alex has kind of really helped lead us through a lot of the classic cyber pieces. I was focused more on privacy at that time. One of the things we really honed in on, and we haven't talked about as much, is transparency. Because if a consumer or a citizen doesn't know who has what about them, they certainly can't make decisions. They certainly can't be comfortable or outraged either without knowing. And certainly AI seems, if we throw AI in the mix, I am sure that's not helping with clarity. and transparency. So I will clean up where we netted out on some of the privacy discussions and what we thought was important then, and we can again use that as just context, if nothing else, as a launch point. Cool.
Could I say something on cybersecurity though? Because I was just at an AI governance workshop that ISACA put on, and ISACA issues a lot of the accreditations for cybersecurity and privacy. And it was fascinating. You know, of course, NIST has now an AI governance framework. ISO has something for 4207 or something like that. I mean, but nowhere in that 4-hour discussion yesterday was security by design in AI mentioned. It's interesting that we're back to applying, you know, we're sort of talking about all of the after controls, right? Like that I as the customer, or you as the API maker, or you as Hugging Face, the company that's going to put the platform out where everybody grabs, you know, open source models or whatever. We're back to this thing where it's incumbent upon everybody else except the people making and publishing the models to provide for cybersecurity and data privacy. And it's sort of that's where we are in the cybersecurity industry, is we're slapping all of these controls on as an afterthought. And that was a concern. I didn't really get a chance to dive into that conversation with anyone. But recently there's a podcast called All In, which is an interesting podcast. There's 4 venture capitalists, some of you may know who they are, very prominent, who were talking about they talk about AI a lot on the podcast because they fund a lot of these companies. And one of the things mentioned was that Ilya Sutskever, who is one of the leading architects of AI models, was let go from OpenAI. It's not clear what happened. He has his own venture now, but he's leaving and he's going to go do this other thing. And one of the guys who would know, one of the VCs on the podcast who would know, said, the reality is that Sam Altman wants to move really fast and go to market and do all these things. And people like Ilya and others in the AI industry and who are raising concerns about safety and ethics and all this stuff are just an impediment. And so Ilya, and there was this thing where they tried to get rid of Sam as the CEO some months ago. That didn't work out. They brought him right back. And they're saying it's because Ilya couldn't build a coalition internally because there's just not enough buy-in for pumping the brakes on because of safety, security, and ethics, in lieu of the go-to-market, raise capital, et cetera, right? And so now Ilya is going to go do this new venture, and good luck to him. But if he's going to, you know, stand in his own way with safety and ethics, he's not going to beat anybody to market, because Google and Facebook and everybody else is already out in front with this stuff. And again, there's all this regulatory stuff coming out, but it's all not security by design, right? We're not auditing source code. We're not, you know, the things that Axel talked about. How did these open source infected infected code libraries that are open source make it into the Orion software to begin with? That would have been the root cause to prevent, right, the SolarWinds thing in part. Mm-hmm. And so that was just an observation I had. The other thing, with the AT&T breach recently, they paid a ransom. Patelco, very disconcerting. I can't find anywhere from a technical digest of what happened at Patelco, because I think there's a gag order internally. And I've seen this before, where there are people who are interested in attribution in the cybersecurity industry, finding out what happened from a technical standpoint, and you can't get any information for months and months. And so I think there's heads are going to roll. Honestly, I hope, on this AT&T thing, because them paying a ransom is just, the optics of that are very problematic. You know, they, as a managed IT services provider, they're calling me every day, pushing me to sell their cybersecurity solutions to our clients, right? I mean, if aside from everything else, just every time there's one of these big breaches, we coincidentally see an increased amount of phishing and social engineering attacks that are pretty targeted on our clients. There's a direct after effect and correlation. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's a couple of months, but it ebbs and flows whenever there are large public breaches like this. And right now it's bad. It's through the roof. We've had 4 close calls with our customers in the last 2 months. And we're pretty bullish on cybersecurity, and so are our clients. And the reality is, and we're going to have this talk with our team. We already know that this is the case. Whatever we were doing heretofore is not going to work moving forward, because the velocity and the sophistication is just too much for our clients to handle. We still get single-digit click rates on phishing campaigns, so we know that people are susceptible. So, yeah, sorry. I needed to vent, really. is what
Well,
Yeah.
no, that was
it is,
actually
but
kind
thank
of
you.
a lead in. No, one of the topics, Alex, was just I mentioned at the top of the hour that I'd done some analysis just as a barometer. How's it going with ransomware and breaches this so far this year since we hit mid-year? It's terrible. So I've got some. I got some quick. Since we're on the topic, I'll just parade us through a couple quick headlines. I will just say the Patelco thing. If folks don't know what that revolved around, so there's about 500,000 Patelco customers, most of them in Northern California. Patelco was hit on June 29th of this year and was basically knocked offline, put out of commission where customers could not go to ATMs, they could not walk into a branch, they could not move money online, they couldn't use Zelle to transfer payments. And this went on for week after week. Can you imagine your bank, your money's here, it's not gone, but you can't utilize it, and we can't tell you how much you have. And so this was just resolved 2 days ago. So it was a 2.5 week outage of, a regional institution. It wasn't like a B of A or Wells, but how bad is that, right? And what does that do to consumer confidence? Plus, it really impacted a lot of people's lives in, a very tactical way. I'm just going to share a couple of the headlines because I found it just staggering. And we'll just do a couple little hand waving here and go forward.
Yeah. Chris, before you do that, if I might follow up a bit, because there's a theme here that I think is very instructive, starting with what Alex said about security by design not being talked about even. 1987, I'm a TRW, I'm a cybersecurity engineer. The Air Force comes to us with the design for the communication system for an F something or other, whatever the fighter pilot was. Here's the design, would you guys secure it? And we looked at them and laughed and said, no, you build security in the design, you don't wait till the end. That was in the 1980s, and we're still doing it. Why are we doing it becomes the question. And that goes, I think, to what you said, Marguerite, around the profit motive. The ProPublica did the report on Microsoft. This was June 16th. We published it in our news of the week. If I can quote from the story, because the story includes this guy discovering a fundamental flaw in the entire way authentication works at Microsoft, fundamental. And the quote goes, you will get a promotion at Microsoft because you released the next new shiny thing. You are not going to get a promotion because you fixed a bunch of security bugs. Quote, publicly traded giants are beholden to the share price, not to doing what's right for the customer. Now, we've also just seen the Supreme Court overrule Chevron, which means it's going to be like a lot harder to get any kind of regulatory push for security by design and so on. We're already seeing that pushback in other cases as well as with CISA. Part of the question for this group, how strongly do we want to advocate? Do we want to just sit here and talk about it and fortunately at times be able to implement it, the stuff we're doing, get ideas that fit? But if we really want to tackle this problem, we've got to tackle this up at the policy level. We've got to tackle it in the courts, at the ballot box, and everywhere else. That's, if you want a top-down solution, I would love to see it bubbling up from the bottom, and I think pressure can bubble up from the bottom. We're part of that pressure, but the solution has got to come from, we the people have got to get up on top of this problem as a people, not as 11 of us here.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think we also need to really address it at the federal level, because what we're getting right now is piecemeal across the country. And that really means that we have unequal rights for citizens and residents in different states, just depending on what state you are, right? And in some states it's a free-for-all, in other states there's protections in place. So that's kind of odd place to be in, where some people have protections, some people don't.
Yeah, I would just add, that the track record of grassroots initiatives from the people bubbling up is, I guess I'd just say it's fighting an uphill battle for sure. So it's about finding who those partners are that really have megaphones and voices and ears to, because this is as fascinating and challenging as these problems are and as desperate as we are to find solutions, there is really nowhere to take that without those additional resources.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the time
and
may
it's-
be right for IFBO to, okay, who are organizations somewhat aligned to us with which we can work so that we can begin to put pressure where it might have some good. I mean, we've got some friends in Congress, Ron Wyden in the Senate is an example. And there's also the force of we the people. That is, I mean, this is affecting more and more and more of us. There's more passion in this discussion than there have been on, 2 years ago, because the situation has gotten more serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder
Yeah,
if
I mean,
some of
but
our research, if some of our research could also highlight, larger companies can absorb these losses. We talked a little bit about it before, but smaller ones, it can bankrupt you, right?
Yeah.
You could be tied up in litigation and game over. So I think that could also be a driver to compel action in addition to working the
Yeah.
policy angle on top.
Yeah. And
Well,
we have
yeah,
sat,
and Nalini, that's such an important point you made. The number we bandy about, good average is 60% of small businesses incurring a cyber incident or breach will be out of business within a year. That could be from reputation loss and losing their client. That could be they rebuilding their tech stack and their infrastructure was more than they could bear. It could be a lot of things. But I mean, how staggering is that? This is the lifeblood of the U.S. economy,
Yeah.
and more than half will be out of business if they have a significant incident within a year.
we've
The
seen
other thing I was just
suicides.
thinking about was the kind of the inverse to Marguerite's comment about who's making the money in the status quo is like who's feeling the most pain aside from the individual citizen, right? That's our grassroots. We feel for them. We are them. But then, I'm thinking about, well, who else is actually this situation not ideal for? Like I'm thinking cybersecurity insurers, right? Because they're having increased exposure. Yeah, they're raising their premiums, but I don't think anyone's getting rich in that space, right? Would be my guess. It's probably a constant war raising premiums, and then they have the underwriters have increased exposure because the environment is so bad. So if that were true, they could be someone that has some weight, right? Some lobbying power, some resources to partner with, people like that actually have some skin in the game and aren't benefiting from the current situation. I don't know. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really complicated even with the regulations, because if you put in fines, they can easily just put that into the cost of doing business, right? And so there's been a couple like bills that have been proposed before for particularly in the context of like social media, like moderation and spread of misinformation and disinformation, in terms of potentially criminalizing it as a jail time for tech executives. But I also think that creates a weird incentive. So I don't know if that's really workable, because then you have like one person, like Zuckerberg being afraid of jail time. So then he's like taking too heavy-handed of an approach, right?
Mhm.
So it's weird, like, because if it's, if it's a fine, the business could potentially just work that into their cost of doing business, right? So how do you actually enforce, right? That's the hard part.
Well, and
And the cost of doing that is such a factor in our world. I mean, this whole conversation reminds me in my world of when Sarbanes-Oxley happened, and it took an absolute countrywide crisis in financial impact that reverberated through many, many circles, with the whole Enron collapse, Arthur Andersen collapse, the whole implosion there, and then the subsequent implementation of Sarbanes-Oxley, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the PCAOB, all of this stuff that is now baked into the cost of public company audits that are absolutely astronomical. And so how does a small business operate in that once there is, I hope it doesn't take something as catastrophic as all of that, but maybe it will. And then how does that translate? Because it's not just big public companies in our case that could be subject to damages. It's all these little companies like my company or your companies and so forth.
Yeah, that's reflective of there's two worlds where we've got here. There's the big company world, government and so on. And then the little companies, the 99% of the businesses in America that have, what, fewer than 1,000 people, Chris, something like that. You know, we live in a different space that way. And I think part of it for us, for our customers, our clients, is what you said, Axel, is tying it to a loss of revenue, loss of jobs, and so on. And it's being able to do that emotively and connecting emotionally to what that means. I mean, we've seen businesses, we've seen suicides, you know, after cyber attacks. You know, and I don't want to say it's not just the loss of business, but it's more than that. So, yeah, for all of that.
Yeah. Just for background, I just put the link to a quick matrix I threw together of some of the top breaches just so far this year. We don't need to cover it. I mean, I think the point's been made. I will say though, the top line number, by one estimate, 1.1 U.S. Citizen records compromised so far in the first half of 2024. That's like every U.S. citizen, you know, child through a senior being compromised 3 times this year. So, I mean, how is that okay?
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to say something. This is, I have to sound very cynical. But I had this thought.
Chris, your microphone seems to be cutting out when you turn that other direction.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? I think I have to lean in.
There
Can you hear
go.
me okay now? Okay.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I had this thought, and it'll sound pretty cynical coming from someone in the, you know, authentication and cybersecurity solution space. But when I just look at these trends and the fact that it's actually not only staying static, it's actually getting worse. And I think, but people are still making a ton of money in this space, right? If you're on the solution side, you're still making a ton of money because there's such a problem. And then I thought, gee, this almost feels a little like big pharma, right? It's like there's a lot of acute conditions that don't necessarily have cures yet, but you know, people are still making a lot of money in the meantime. And I thought, is that the right comparison here? Because we're not really moving the needle forward as an industry. We're keeping up and there's innovation, but there has not been sea change innovation or legislation to the points that were made that are going to change things. It's been increments, and the bad guys are incrementing faster. And my personal opinion is I don't even think we've seen any semblance of AI leashed on this by the bad guys yet. I don't think they have to. I think it's easy enough without even getting too, you know, too exotic. But you know, that's my point of view. So it seems like one, you know, just kind of recapping, there's definitely some passion on this, like there was, you know, data privacy and on AI, but it feels like we could come back as a group and talk about, you know, real specific ways we might band together to move the needle forward, and moving it from a grassroots and a bunch of, you know, smart people that talk about this to like, how do we actually get some traction, and you know, who are the allies or what are the channels we can to use here. So I've grabbed that as one, you know, one topic to come back to as a group. Looking forward. Irene, looks like you have your hand up. No?
I am wondering if a series of class action lawsuits could be helpful in driving the idea of the need for regulation and for all-encompassing regulation and action on the part of our government. The question is, would there be attorneys willing to do that?
Right. We tried it many, many times, and the worst one was the breach that included all of the social security numbers, and all that came out of it was $9 and 3 years of monitoring your credit.
Are you referring to Equifax?
That was the Equifax. They should have been sued out of existence, and they got not even a slap on the wrist.
I don't think it was a class action lawsuit. I think there was
Yes, it
some
was.
kind of it was grassroots class action. Okay.
No, it was
Well,
a
but
lawsuit.
they settled. They settled.
Yes, they settled for $9 and 3 years of credit monitoring.
I know. I was one of those people.
So
Yeah, I mean, most
So-
cases
Yeah.
settle.
there
Yeah,
are also attempts now to
Oh, sorry.
pierce the corporate shield in these lawsuits against boards of directors. Now, that may begin to be successful, but then, of course, we'll find insurance will cut in and, reinsure, and that problem will go off the table again. I mean, what's the story about the young student who goes to interview this really rich executive, like super entrepreneur, very successful, and says, "What's the secret of your success?" And he looks at her and says, "Good judgment." And she says, "How did you get good judgment?" He smiles and says, "Bad judgment." Is that what America has to go through?
Well,
Is that our future?
Yeah.
I do have to say some CISOs have been held accountable. We've seen instances of where CISOs and even
Yeah.
in the Uber case, for example, right? So there's fear in the CISO community, but the problem is they go to the business folks and they say these things and nobody really takes them that seriously. So if we're going to pierce the corporate veil, I think if it hits executives, that would have an impact.
I think
Executives,
we're
we
gonna
need-
have some, like, I think there's gonna be lots of problems given what's been going on kind of in the background, like the fact that our Supreme Court is kind of making crazy, like overturning precedent and making really like crazy decisions. Like the overturning of the Chevron case is crazy because now basically, an unqualified court can just say what they want to be the law, and regulatory agencies just don't have the authority to like regulate anymore, right? And I don't know if you guys have read this whole Project 2025 or whatever. They want to get rid of all the agencies. So we may be in a worse position than we are now moving forward just because the agencies won't be around or have power.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, these grassroots efforts, like if you think of the big ones, like ESG really has, I would say a lot of momentum, and large corporate teams are caring about this at every level. And there's a lot of requirements for individual companies to have to report on it. And, they've got shareholders who care about it. So there's enough, I think, in social media or whatever, however the motivation really gained momentum. I feel like those are the kinds of patterns maybe to follow. And I'm just curious, Jeff, I don't know your role and what you see, because you guys probably have to report on ESG, and it's got a lot of momentum from your standpoint. You probably have to deal with it.
Well, for ESG and for the other issues we've been talking about, I've been thinking about this from a legislative standpoint kind of throughout this conversation. Nalini's point about legislation being reactive really resonates with me. When we have privacy laws that predate the internet and the major actors are only really getting involved to keep it that way, I wonder what level of crisis would be required to provoke a legislative response. Overall, theoretically, Chevron will put more pressure on Congress. I think things will start bubbling up in a lot of areas where people are clamoring for Congress to do X, Y, Z. I'm interested in talking about what a tactical path would be to achieving some of these legislative end states that we'd want, and then what they would be specifically. Personal data as privacy, or personal data as property is a really interesting point. Interested in talking more about that and what a path would be toward that. And to, Axel's point about it being the basis of GDPR. If the point of GDPR was to raise the floor on global firms, then I'm interested in talking more about how that has or hasn't worked, especially now that the EU has done the same thing with the AI Act. In the US, I think consumers have completely abandoned any pretense of privacy. And again, I wonder what event in someone's life would be required before they would revisit that. At the macro level, that data is used against us in all kinds of terrible ways. So there are a lot of other things we've talked about that I'm interested to dig in on. I don't just want to ramble on, but maybe one or two more I'd kind of reflect on as we come to the end of the 90 minutes here would be how much is incumbent on big actors versus small actors. Stan's totally correct that we can't rely on big organizations, but at the same time, I think Nalini's point's totally right that big organizations need to take responsibility. And in terms of pessimism about the federal response, to Axel's point about the Biden administration not responding, another rich area of conversation is How is CISA doing with vulnerability intake, management, and response, including standing up, conversations with industry? They don't have the same tools in the toolkit that, say, the SEC does. We talk about human risk factors and social engineering, but at societal level, how do we improve collaboration across organizations, including on vulnerability response? And again, tying into the EU Cyber Solidarity Act, same question.
Well, one thing we could start out with is basically, if I'm attacked, make it legal for me to counterattack, right? So we did that with an attack that came from APT29. We followed those guys through. We did a trace route. We found, in fact, exactly where they came from because they forgot to use a proxy to attack us, right? So we overwrote the BIOS of a $100,000 Cisco router that is now unusable because they can't buy a new one and they can't update that BIOS anymore because the thing, we overrode it and we shut it down and it never starts, it will ever start again, right? That should be made legal. If somebody attacks me, I can take whatever big hammer I have and hit back. That should be made legal because right now it's not, right? If somebody in the US attacks me, a cyber attack, I have to go to court. I don't fucking want to go to court. I want to just take him out.
So, okay, can I push back respectfully? Because I think there's a lot of truth to what you said. But first of all, I'm very, very fearful of amateurs trying to hack back and not know what they're doing and just mess things up. I think there's also the attribution problem. You're good enough and smart enough to know if you get attacked, you can trace it back, particularly if they mess up with routers and addressing and things like that. The average, particularly the smaller businesses, are not. And I fear for them what happens if we get into a shooting match. And I also think it's analogous to if somebody breaks into my, if somebody I can defend myself in the act of defending myself. But if somebody, let's say, steals something from me, I can't go track them down and shoot them. I've got to call the police. And do we really want to get down that, that slippery slope of allowing something else that way? And the other side of it, we've got Microsoft and Cisco and companies like that, who at least to some level are working with CISA and are working with the Department of Justice, so that when there is a takedown, it's often Interpol, FBI, the private sector, Microsoft helping, and so on. So, I think some of that is going on. So I think it's more nuanced than you're talking, Axel.
I've reported every single incident to the Internet Crime Complaint Center at the FBI. We never, ever, ever got a response. Nothing was ever done about it. So, I'm sorry. If first getting to a point where you have Wild West and then it gets regulated, I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Right? I'll take the biggest hammer I can. Right? Yeah. I'll take the biggest hammer I can. And believe me, that server was in Russia, APT29. You can look it up, right? That's out of business because the router in front of it is kaput. It's gone. Right?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something Claire said a moment ago about the rise of ESG and how that's become a movement and how boards are paying attention and companies are paying attention. And it went, to go from something people should do to companies should do to now it's a part of almost any major company. That's great, right? That's a success story if you believe in those things. And so then it's like, well, how did at some point people started clamoring, saying we really care about the environment, we really care about equality, all the things that are embodied in ESG. I wonder where the temperature check is, where the average person, how much they feel resigned to the status quo around their privacy and their data versus upset about it. And how do you, and I'm guessing there's going to be a lot more people that are kind of sanguine about it than those who are up in arms right now. But maybe part of that is they don't understand all of the harm that this can cause, this being their data being used against them. So I don't know if anyone on the call has any recent exposure to either primary or secondary data that might give some kind of inkling into where the typical person is, thinking about their own data. Certainly the notion of considering your privacy is a new one where I would say people have not thought about that. And that, that could be something that elicits a different response than we've seen in the past. But I just open that up. Does anyone have any sense of where this sits with the average person in their list of concerns?
I think people are starting to like kind of think about it more, because I think people didn't really think about it at all. And then, you know, you got the initiative, like the referendum and initiative passed in California, which was a ballot initiative where people kind of were thinking about privacy more. So I think people are thinking about it, but they don't quite understand it. So there's like a difference there where you kind of know like, oh, privacy sounds good, so like, you know, I should do this, but they don't understand how it actually works and what it actually means. I think that's where the disconnect still is. And I still think a lot of people don't care, right? I think it's generational too. They had done a study, like, I don't know, it was an article I read like maybe 10 years ago or a little bit, maybe 7. And they were talking about how, you know, older generations, we actually grew up disconnect. Like there were periods of times where we were not 24 hours connected to the internet, right? So we grew up in an age where we were used to playing outside and all that. Younger generations have been on YouTube since they were children. So they don't actually have this like concern about privacy. So they will, some of the tweens were selling their data to Facebook in exchange for $20. Like, oh yeah, Facebook, you can track my calls and my texts. I don't care as long as you're giving me $20 a month. So, you know, they're monetizing it, so that's fine if they're happy with that decision. But I think most people don't really probably care that much about privacy, and that's why I kind of again see it as a property would be better since you can at least monetize it.
I agree with you to an extent. However, you have to look within each group of people because it's more nuanced than that. So while some are willing to monetize, others, once they know what some of the risks are, aren't. And I wonder if this group, and I'm new, has done any briefing material that we could use to actually educate local legislators, state legislators, be part of other groups, because it's a combination of awareness building, because you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't care about privacy, but is that because they've made a conscious choice or they don't know any better? What are the implications?
It's convenience. Right? It's convenience. That's what we've all decided. It's convenient to not care about it and to just get the app that tracks us, right? And I don't think you can get privacy. Like I think that's gone. So you can, the most you can get is control, some kind of control over your data and what's done with it. So maybe who you want to share it with.
With that kind
Alexa,
of,
oh,
sorry.
Alexa had her hand up. Sorry, Jeff. You go, and then Alexa, your hand was up. Go, Jeff.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't see that. Sorry, Alexa.
No worries, no worries. Okay,
Oh,
Alexa.
sorry, Jeff. Oh, I was just going to say that just to follow on to, you know, we discovered, and what was it in 2022, that the one time that I've been looking at consumer, you know, privacy concerns for a couple of years. And then in 2022, we know that we had a big segment of the population, women, started caring about their privacy when Roe was overturned. And that was simply because women were motivated, right? There was a bit of panic that happened. And I think that's what we're seeing, that once a privacy area is threatened to a certain segment of the population, then they start caring. And just shy of that, I think absolutely you're right, that prior to that, people just were like, it's all out there, you know, or it's too hard, you know, it's either too hard or it's all out there. And so it's easier to just do nothing because I don't have the skills or the time, right? It just takes too much effort. So that is the one thing we've seen. And then when you actually start caring because you have something that you do want to keep private, or you think that, you know, someone needs to keep private, it still kind of ends up though, still that people are like, yeah, I care about it, but it's still too hard. I still don't have enough time to figure it out. So I don't know. My observations, and I'm trying to address it right now. I'm doing research on this at the very moment. And I'm not 100% convinced that it's enough unless we make it really easy for people that anything's going to change. We have to make it easier for them. And the laws themselves are too hard. There's too many of them. It's just, there's no unification across the states. So at a federal level, that it's just, if anyone tries to research privacy laws, even consumer facing privacy laws, they're going to realize it's hundreds of them out there. They're inconsistent and they just will give up because that's just as hard as trying to figure out how to actually protect your personal data.
Thanks, Alexa. It makes me wonder too, when we're talking about legislators who might be sympathetic to this. I haven't checked in on them in the last year or two, but Alexa, remember we were looking at through part of Secure the Village, we're looking at Ro Khanna, the representative from Santa Clara Valley, who seemed to kind of get it. There was some legislation that was being put forth probably, and Mavareed or Nalini, you can keep me honest, but probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that seemed like it was in the right spirit, and it was they're trying to pose,
We
pass
talked
it at
to
a
him
federal level.
extensively. We talked to him extensively. He makes all
Yeah.
the right noises and then does nothing.
Oh, he's a politician.
Yeah.
So I think the economic incentives of this issue are totally misaligned in a way that's also hard to legislate around. The consumers have no products available to them that have these choices respected. The whole design space and the whole economic space is built upon the extraction of that data.
Mm-hmm.
And so people don't even have the opportunity to access products that respect it before they get to the point where they want to. And we can legislate an additional cost onto the, it's easy for me to say I work for a B2B company, but, let's just say hypothetically, if we legislate the additional cost of giving a property right to the consumer, I mean, it's interesting, but then what is you're asking the whole industry to turn on a dime. And I'm not saying I like it. I just think that it's, especially when you look at the impact on kids and then the predictive, content delivery that comes off of it. This is the right group to be focusing on it. This is a great conversation. Thanks again for including me.
Yeah.
So we did look at incentives for the various stakeholders involved in the cybersecurity ecosystem, from government to enforcement agencies to vendors to consumers. And you're right, Jeff, the incentives are not aligned at all. And so there's some transhumance, around doing the things that would actually solve the problem. The incentives don't seem to be there. But without that aside, we never actually finished that exercise. And I was thinking we could bring in somebody who's into design thinking, who knows how to take people through the design thinking modality, that we could brainstorm some ideas around this that way to have a more structured conversation. So there's a lot of ways we can take this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What?
One other comment.
Yeah. Nalini.
Building upon an earlier comment about convenience, I think we need to take that into consideration as well. And in our design thinking, think about what are some alternatives. Some things are more convenient and have deeper trade-offs. Other things are less convenient, but have better protections. Again, a matter of offering choice where we can, shining a light on, there are options. We do have agency. Is it hard? Yeah. Well, it took a long time to get all kinds of other societal rights in the United States. African Americans have not given up. They've been at it 450 years. Surely we can be at it for a couple more decades, right? Thank you.
I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a
Well
great,
said.
note to close this meeting on. The conversation was tremendous. I mean, the upwelling of interest and ideas, fantastic. My pen was smoking as I'm taking notes here, and we have the video. I think there are 3 big tracks that came out of here. Just to, really was around what's next, what we're doing with AI. How do we move the needle on breaches in cybersecurity, which impacts the third one, and these aren't in order of importance, by the way, around consumer privacy, consumer protection, and how do we move the needle there. So this is great. Thank you again. Give us a bit of time, me, Alex, and Nicole, to come together and I think what we can do is kind of get the bones of a kind of scope and outline of each of these and send it out to the group and get some additional feedback and make sure we're not missing any points. And then we can figure out how we want to, how and when we want to sequence and tackle these. So again, thank you all for your free sharing of your thoughts and experiences. So valuable. So thank you. So we, just for the new folks, we meet the 3rd Thursday of every month at this time, 10 a.m. Pacific. So if it's not, if you don't see it on your calendar, make sure you let one of us know. We'll make sure you get the series on there. So great. Thanks, everyone. Talk again soon.
Thank you. Happy
See everybody.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
All right.
Send a
Bye-bye.
recap out.
Hope
Thank
to
you.
see everyone next month. Bye-bye.
Yep. All right.
Nicole, can you save the chat log? Or Chris? I don't think I'm
Let's see.
co-host. 'cause I
Nicole was
left it.
having, yeah, she was having some issues. Let's see, I'm logged in as me, so I can't.
Uh,
You need to be an
Well,
account.
you, but you're,
I can
no,
do
but you're a
account update.
co-host.
Oh, I can
Oh,
download it.
are you talking about the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it automatically downloads, and I always save it once in the middle and once at the end, just in case.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
So we should be good. The only thing, I think I added both new people to the invites.
We had 3, right? We had
I know we had
Claire was there
Nalini.
before, right? Yeah.
I don't know that I have Claire's. I think I have Claire's email. If not, I'll double check.
Yeah, I can give it to you, Nicole, if you don't have it.
Yeah, that would
don't-
be great, just to add it to the invite, so that way whenever we send out messages, both of them are included.
Yeah.
And then more of the, yeah, so there's
Yes,
3.
I've got both of them.
Okay,
And
great.
is Claire's last name Martel?
Yeah,
Yep, then I've got her also, so we're good.
So-
okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's,
So
yeah, if we could see the chat log, and Chris, let's digest our notes, and we can then, everybody, we can get a kind of a recap out and next steps to people.
yeah, it was a great conversation. So I think that's just gonna see if we can kind of sketch out, the contours of the next on each of these main areas, but very good feedback. I mean, very good participation. So, and a great perspectives. I mean, it's actually kind of exciting. The new folks who joined too, I think, really bring some new perspectives, right, and some depth in areas that maybe we didn't before. So very cool. So thank you for inviting them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
So can we do this? Can we plan to, we'll all kind of take stock of our notes and whatnot, but can we plan to meet like in no more than 2 weeks from now, just so it doesn't leave
Sure.
our brains for the next one?
Yeah. Yeah, let's do that. Let's coordinate a time via phone, because I need to, wait a second, what is going on? Okay. Yeah, I'm driving, so I'm trying to keep my direction straight. So yeah, let's definitely sync up. I feel like we're at a good place to kind of pause and plan next few meetings.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Thanks all.
Thanks, guys. Once the recording's done and uploaded, I'll send it to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.